Hi, my name is Tristan Roach, and today I'm going to be presenting on primate social system methods and how they are generally very confusing and inconsistent across study sites. So the focus of this presentation is going to be on primatology's interdisciplinary nature and how this has impacted modern methods, where some inconsistencies lie with past and current methods, what some new approaches that are being taken by modern researchers, and what are the next steps for primatology to make it a more cohesive and uniform field in its method. So getting into who primatologists are, they are a diverse group of researchers spanning three major disciplines: zoology, psychology, and anthropology. While psychology and anthropology are social sciences, zoology is a physical science, and these are generally considered separate fields. This unique position between the physical and social sciences has resulted in primate research interests being broad, with each discipline bringing with it their own goals and methodological traditions. Because of this position between the physical and social sciences, primatology's approaches and terminology often borrow from one another, as anthropological studies will draw on zoological studies without fully understanding the meaning behind some terminology. Primates, needless to say, are a hugely diverse group of organisms occupying more than half of the continents, and they vary morphologically, socially, phylogenetically, ecologically. However, they vary in much more nuanced ways. Understanding this diversity has necessitated a huge variety in methodological approaches, which has led to a complicated legacy of uncoordinated and often contradictory studies. These studies are then compared to one another, creating even more confusion within the field. Getting into the history of social system studies, they began in the 1930s and 1930s through the 1960s with psychologists and zoologists using anecdotal style evidence to try to elucidate different primate social systems. Beginning in the 1960s, they began to emphasize comparability between studies and began documenting the function and fitness increasing qualities of social behavior. This also coincided with a shift in the field to making behaviors quantifiable and conducive to quantitative analysis and thus more comparable. This is also the time when anthropologists entered the field. With them, they brought the idea of studying primates as models for human evolution. This led to an overrepresentation of Cercopithecines, aka Old World monkeys, and apes in primate literature. This wave of studies, which was, again, more reliant on quantitative data and thus more comparable, was used to gave rise to models meant to simplify the complex array of primate social systems. By using studies not conducive to comparisons, models like the socio-ecological model were built on faulty logic, making them unable to predict aspects of primate systems. Additionally, these studies were often overly reliant on data from apes and Cercopithecine studies, which were not truly representative of primate diversity. These models quickly fell apart in the face of primate diversity. It was mainly because of the lack of coordination between studies, making studies not comparable at all. And additionally, while the models like the social ecological model may have considered a generally large array of factors, they failed to consider other important factors like phylogeny and sexual selection. Finally, they lacked consistency and definition in studies and parameters for data collection and statistical analysis. So getting into modern studies, they recognize a lot of the shortcomings of their predecessors and have generally taken a more limited scope and a consideration of as many variables as possible, spanning ecology, phylogeny, biology. Basically, they try to consider as many things as possible. Comparative studies have generally taken the place of large-scale models and only attempt to compare primates who are comparable on multiple fronts. Modern studies also recognize the impacts of humans on primate evolution through the new lens of ethnoprimatology. It considers how humans have impacted primate evolution in the past and how the Anthropocene is impacting primate ecologies. It challenges the idea of natural spaces, which are free from human impact, and calls for an emphasis on looking at human activity in the examination of primate ecologies. Studies have continued to rely heavily on quantitative data, emphasizing the application of computer and statistical analysis. Social network analysis is one of the most commonly used methods across social studies, also used in psychology and sociology. It uses graph theory to track interactions between individuals within a social unit. It posits that primates interact with one another in non-random ways, and by tracking interactions between each individual, you can compare various matrices of interactions within a population and thus gain insight into the social system. This is an excellent study tool, but again, due to lack of coordination and transparency between studies, there are still many inconsistencies, and comparisons are still difficult to make. Method studies have arisen to partially solve this issue. These studies attempt to find where differences lie in sampling methods or statistical parameters. For example, studies use social network analysis but test differences in focal and ad libitum sampling in constructing grooming networks. This allows two studies comparing grooming networks, however, that use different sampling methods to be more easily compared. Finally, getting into some points for improvement, researchers must first identify false assumptions and biases that modern research has been built on, and this can be done in the form of literature reviews, which give rise to new points of view, like ethnoprimatology. Additionally, transparency in methods and definitions is crucial. Clearly laying out which definitions were used and which methods were used will promote more effective comparative studies. Recognizing shortcomings and inviting alternative hypotheses would also lead to a more cohesive body of literature. Continuing method studies would also help document gaps in data sets and will allow past studies to be salvageable and allow comparisons of these studies to be made. By implementing these improvements, primatologists would begin building to a more unified literary body in spite of the field's multidisciplinary past and contradictory studies. By increasing coordination and making the emphasis of modern studies their comparability instead of their novelty, researchers will be able to make new connections between primate sociality and their environments that previous studies and generations would not allow. Thank you.